My younger brother picked up the gift my daughter had spent weeks making. He laughed, flipped it in his hand, and said, "Cheap, worthless trash." Then he tossed it across the room, not hard, just careless enough to sting. It clipped Kendall's shoulder and slid across the hardwood, red ribbon unraveling like it was embarrassed to exist. 3 conversations stopped at once. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. Kendall stood frozen beside me, her fingers still stained with dried glue and marker ink from the night she'd stayed up past bedtime finishing that gift. She'd wrapped it herself in brown craft paper, folded with the kind of focus only kids have when something matters deeply. I saw her eyes flick down, not to the gift, but to my face. She wasn't watching her uncle. She was watching me, measuring what safety looked like in that moment. Gage leaned back in his chair like he'd just made a clever joke. He wore his confidence loud, even when his voice wasn't. Designer watch catching the light. Phone face down beside his plate. He didn't apologize. He didn't look at Kendall. He looked around the table instead, checking reactions, feeding on them. That had always been his way. Test the room. Claim the space. Let discomfort belong to everyone else. This was supposed to be a quiet family dinner at my parents' place in Plano, Texas. Pot roast cooling in the center. Wine glasses half full. The kind of evening that pretends history doesn't exist if everyone behaves long enough. Gage had arrived late, talking about a new investment property and traffic like the world waited for him. Kendall had been nervous all afternoon, rehearsing what she'd say when she handed him the gift. I felt the familiar pressure rise in my chest, the instinct to smooth things over, to explain, to protect everyone's comfort. I breathed deep, realizing how I reacted now would teach Kendall far more than yelling ever could. My calm wasn't weakness. It was control. And as I looked at my brother smiling at nothing, I understood this wasn't just about a gift. It never had been. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. Standing there, watching Kendall press her lips together so she wouldn't cry, I wasn't thinking about the gift anymore. I was thinking about how many times I'd swallowed moments like this before. How often silence had been the price of peace in my family. Gage hadn't just crossed a line that night. He'd stepped on one that had been drawn years ago, one I'd been quietly standing behind alone. Because in my family, Gage had always been given space before he ever earned it. Clyde and Marlene called him driven. Ambitious. A natural leader. At family gatherings, his voice filled rooms the way confidence is supposed to. He talked about opportunities, connections, future deals, always just ahead of where reality actually sat today. My parents listened with pride, mistaking volume for stability. No one asked for details. No one wanted to be the one to slow him down. I learned early that my role was different. I became the adaptable one. The reliable one. When Kendall was born and her father faded into missed calls and empty promises, no one stepped forward. They just assumed I would manage. And I did. Quietly. Without applause. Stability became my identity long before I realized it had a cost. Gage noticed that long before anyone else did. The first time he asked me for money, it wasn't dramatic. It was calculated. Coffee downtown, papers already printed. His tone light like we were discussing weekend plans. Just a co-sign, he said, sliding the documents toward me. Temporary. Low risk. Family helping family. My parents already knew. That part was revealed gently, like a door closing behind me. I read every page. What people don't talk about with co-signing is how fast trust turns into liability. If payments stop, banks don't care about intentions. They care about signatures. Risk doesn't recognize family bonds. It recognizes responsibility. I hesitated. Gage smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You don't trust me? He asked, just loud enough. My mother went quiet. My father adjusted his glasses. Silence did the rest. I said no anyway. Calmly. Respectfully. The room cooled, and no one addressed it directly. That was how tension lived in our family. Unspoken, but permanent. After that, Gage stopped asking. He started keeping score. Little comments replaced conversations. Jokes about how some people were afraid of growth. about how loyalty looked different when money was involved. My parents echoed his disappointment without confronting him. I noticed. I always did. Kendall noticed too. She learned when to smile and when to disappear. She learned restraint by watching me practice it daily. By the time that dinner happened, by the time the gift lay broken on the floor, this was never about money. It was about control. And Gage believed he still had it. Control doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing familiarity, wearing family. After that night, nothing was said out loud. That was the part that unsettled me the most. No apology. No explanation. Just a sudden shift in how Gage interacted with us. His messages became shorter. His tone, sharper. And Kendall, who used to be invisible to him, suddenly became a tool. It started small. Invitations that came late. Plans that changed without warning. Group texts where decisions had already been made before I was included. Gage never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He had learned long ago that pressure works better when it feels reasonable. One afternoon, Kendall showed me her phone. Uncle Gage said I shouldn't bring handmade stuff next time, she said quietly, scrolling. He said some people don't understand effort. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I sat beside her on the couch, the afternoon light catching the glue stains still on her fingers. She had spent weeks on that gift. Cutting, repainting, starting over when it didn't look right. To her, it wasn't craft time. It was love. To Gage, it was leverage. That's when I realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about humiliation disguised as hierarchy. About reminding us where we stood without ever having to say it directly. If I reacted emotionally, I would look unstable. If I stayed quiet, he would push further. So I did something different. I stopped explaining. When Gage sent messages asking for help framed as responsibility, I responded with one sentence. Polite. Neutral. No justification. No emotional padding. Just no. Each time, his replies came faster. Colder. As if my restraint confused him. He escalated in ways only someone obsessed with control would. Suddenly, there were rules. Expectations. Comments about how Kendall should behave around successful adults. Jokes that landed just softly enough to be brushed off, but sharp enough to cut. I watched him closely. His eyes flicked to others when he spoke, checking reactions. Measuring power. Kids learn from adults, whether we intend to teach them or not. And I knew if I let him humiliate us without resistance, Kendall would absorb the message that cruelty was authority and silence was survival. I wouldn't teach her that. So I began setting boundaries without announcing them. No more last-minute favors. No more emotional access. No defending myself in rooms where respect was already decided. Each no was calm. Unemotional. And each one unsettled him more than anger ever could. Gage thought escalation would break me. What he didn't realize was that every move he made was teaching me exactly how he operated. And I was paying attention. I didn't respond to my brother that night. Not because I didn't feel the urge to, but because I could still see Kendall's face in my mind, the way her shoulders had stiffened, the way she'd gone quiet too fast, like a child learning a lesson she never asked for. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights slid across the windshield in slow intervals, and Kendall sat in the back seat holding the broken corner of the gift she'd made. She hadn't cried. That scared me more than tears would have. Kids cry when they expect comfort. Silence means they're processing something alone. When we walked into our apartment, she placed her shoes neatly by the door, the way I taught her, then asked in a small voice if she could fix the gift later. Not if her uncle was wrong. Not why he said that. Just whether it was worth fixing. That question landed heavier than anything he'd thrown across the room. I went into the kitchen and stood there for a moment, hands on the counter, breathing slowly. Every instinct told me to storm back, to demand an apology, to make noise. But I didn't. I remembered something I learned the hard way years ago. Reactions feel powerful, but they often give control away. Instead, I knelt in front of Kendall and told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her effort has value even when people don't know how to recognize it. I didn't mention her uncle. I didn't explain adults or entitlement or cruelty. She didn't need a lecture. She needed safety. That night, after she fell asleep, I replayed the moment in my head. The laugh, the casual way he dismissed her work, the way everyone else froze instead of stepping in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It was a pattern finally exposed in front of my child. I opened my notes app and wrote down exactly what happened. The words were plain. No emotion. Just facts. Time. Place. Witnesses. I didn't know yet what I'd need it for. I only knew I wouldn't rely on memory alone anymore. Calm isn't passive. It's preparation. And that was the night I chose it, not for him, but for her. The quiet I chose that night didn't end the situation. It sharpened it. When people like my brother realize you won't react emotionally, they switch tactics. Control looks for another door. A week later, my phone buzzed while I was packing Kendall's lunch. It was a message from my mother, framed like concern but written like an invoice. They were short this month. Gage had suggested I handle a few automatic payments since I was good with systems. The phrasing was familiar. Help disguised as expectation. Responsibility offered without consent. I didn't answer right away. I finished cutting apples into neat slices, sealed Kendall's lunchbox, and walked her to the bus stop. Only after she waved goodbye did I open my banking app. Numbers don't raise their voices. They don't guilt you. They either add up or they don't. That afternoon, I sat across from Lane Foster at the local branch, the same bank I'd used for years. He spoke calmly, professionally, explaining terms my brother never bothered to clarify when money came up at family dinners. Collateral. Exposure. Auto-pay risk. What happens when generosity turns into obligation without limits? I nodded, asked questions, took notes. No drama. Just information. I agreed to help my parents, carefully. I set up auto-pay for specific bills, capped at amounts I could absorb without strain, routed through a separate account. No co-signing. No shared liability. Lane raised an eyebrow approvingly. He'd seen this before. Families who confuse love with access. At home, Kendall sat at the table coloring while I organized documents. She asked why I was working so much lately. I told her sometimes adults prepare quietly so problems don't get loud later. She seemed to accept that, humming softly as she filled the page with color. Protection doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like spreadsheets and boundaries. Gage didn't notice the difference at first. He never does. Control makes people sloppy. He assumed access meant ownership, that my silence meant compliance. Meanwhile, every payment, every transfer, every agreement was documented, contained, and reversible. Generosity without planning is just vulnerability wearing a nice outfit. And this time, I wasn't dressed for that. What happened next didn't stay private. It couldn't. When pride goes unchecked, it looks for an audience. The engagement party was loud, polished, and performative. Crystal glasses, rented smiles, and phones lifted at perfect angles. Gage stood beside me, steady but alert, while Kendall clutched my hand, excited by the lights and music. My brother thrived in this environment. Attention fed him. Then he did it. With a laugh too loud to be accidental, he raised his voice and turned our family tension into entertainment. A joke, wrapped in charm, about money, about who really pays, about favors people owe. Guests chuckled, unsure. A few phones stayed raised longer than necessary. I didn't react. I watched. Kendall's grip tightened. That's when I realized this moment was no longer about me or my brother. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. Public actions create permanent impressions. Online or offline, humiliation travels faster than truth. I gently lowered Kendall's hand and leaned down to whisper that dignity isn't loud, and respect doesn't need an audience. By the end of the night, my brother was still smiling, but the room had shifted. People remember discomfort. And Kendall saw it clearly. What you do in public doesn't disappear when the music stops. That night planted something powerful, early accountability, learned not through punishment, but observation. The embarrassment faded for everyone else by morning. For me, it turned into clarity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't post explanations. I opened a folder. Gage sat beside me at the dining table while Kendall colored quietly, unaware that lines were being drawn, not in anger, but in ink. I called Lane Foster first. Calm questions. Clear timelines. What options existed, what deadlines mattered, and what the law actually allowed, not what people assumed it did. That was the moment I reclaimed control. Repossession isn't revenge. It's procedure. When payments are missed and notices are ignored, consequences follow a legal sequence. Lane confirmed every step had already been documented. Nothing rushed. Nothing hidden. Clean, compliant, final. When the repo team arrived, Kendall was inside with Gage. I didn't want him learning conflict through chaos. Boundaries don't have to be dramatic to be firm. I signed once. That was it. Understanding the law kept emotion from contaminating the process. I wasn't taking something away, I was enforcing an agreement that had been broken. And that distinction mattered, especially for Kendall. Later that night, I told him gently that love doesn't mean unlimited access, and helping someone doesn't require self-destruction. Rights exist to protect families who choose responsibility over guilt. That was the day my brother lost leverage. And the day my son learned that calm boundaries are stronger than loud threats. The silence didn't sit well with him. When people lose control, they often mistake noise for power. My brother did exactly that. Messages came first, long, frantic, and accusatory. Then the calls. Each one louder than the last, as if volume could rewrite agreements or undo consequences. I didn't answer. Gage watched from across the room while Kendall played on the floor, building towers and knocking them down again. It struck me how instinctively children observe patterns. They don't listen to lectures, they study behavior. When my brother finally showed up, his anger filled the doorway before he did. He shouted about betrayal, about family, about how I had humiliated him. His voice rose. His face reddened. He wanted a reaction. I gave him none. Staying calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Rage feeds on engagement, silence starves it. Kendall looked up briefly, then back to his toys, unshaken. That mattered more than winning any argument. I told him, evenly, that discussions happen when respect exists, and not before. No insults. No theatrics. No exceptions. He left furious. I stayed grounded. That contrast became the lesson. Children remember who lost control and who didn't. Emotional regulation isn't taught in speeches, it's modeled in moments like this, when calm holds its ground while anger burns itself out. By the time the house felt quiet again, I realized something important had shifted, not outside, but within me. There was no rush now. No need to explain, defend, or justify. The chaos had burned itself out, leaving only logistics behind. Early the next morning, the repo team arrived, not aggressive, not theatrical. Just professional. Clipboards. Checklists. Process. Kendall stood beside me, his small hand wrapped around mine, watching without fear. I didn't shield him from the moment. I let him see how problems are handled, not with shouting, but with follow-through. The team confirmed details, double-checked documents, and moved with calm efficiency. There was no confrontation. No victory speech. Just closure in motion. As they worked, I talked to Kendall quietly about patience, how some solutions take planning, time, and persistence. That doing the right thing doesn't always feel powerful in the moment, but it builds stability that lasts. When the driveway was empty again, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, steady. Resilience isn't dramatic. It's the ability to keep moving forward when emotions have settled and reality remains. And that, more than any single battle won, was the lesson I wanted Kendall to carry forward. That night, after the house settled and the noise of the past weeks finally faded, Kendall sat beside me on the couch, legs tucked under himself, quiet in the way kids get when they're processing more than they can explain. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. I could feel the weight of questions he wasn't asking yet. So I spoke first, not as someone who had won, but as a mother choosing what lesson would remain when everything else was forgotten. I told him that family is meant to be safe, not loud. Supportive, not demanding. And that love doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's money, time, or peace. Family isn't an ATM, I said gently. And it isn't a place where disrespect gets excused just because you share a last name. He nodded slowly, absorbing it in his own way. I explained that boundaries aren't punishments, they're protections. That choosing peace over chaos doesn't mean you're weak. It means you value your future more than momentary approval. I wanted him to understand that self-respect isn't loud. It's quiet, consistent, and firm. As I tucked him into bed later, he asked if everything was finally okay now. I told him the truth. Things don't magically fix themselves, but when you choose calm over conflict, life gets clearer, lighter. And as I turned off the light, I realized this wasn't just the end of a conflict. It was the beginning of a healthier pattern. One where peace was protected, lessons were lived, and love no longer came with a cost. Months later, our life looked quieter from the outside, but stronger on the inside. The new home wasn't bigger. It didn't have flashy upgrades or impress anyone on social media. But it had something our old place never truly had: peace. Real peace. The kind that lets you sleep without replaying conversations in your head. The kind that makes mornings feel lighter. Kendall thrived there. I watched her confidence grow in small, steady ways. She focused better at school. She smiled more easily. She stopped flinching when voices got loud. Without anyone announcing it, she learned resilience, not from struggle alone, but from watching boundaries hold firm. She learned that hard work builds stability. That kindness doesn't require self-sacrifice. And that walking away from chaos is sometimes the bravest decision a person can make. As for me, I changed too. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped negotiating my peace. I learned that protecting mental well-being is just as important as protecting assets, credit scores, or savings accounts. Maybe more. Family ties didn't disappear, but entitlement lost its grip. And here's what stays with me most: I never raised my voice. I never demanded an apology. I never needed revenge. The outcome spoke louder than anything I could have said. Sometimes the strongest ending isn't confrontation. It's distance. It's dignity. It's choosing a future that no longer needs permission from the past. And that lesson, quiet, firm, and lasting, is the one I hope Kendall carries for life.